We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us fight and be slaves. And everybody's just walking around, head in the clouds, who won't awaken to a dead in the grave. By then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days. Everybody is slave.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Nephilim Death Squad, the show where we hunt down and expose Nephilim shit. I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. I am here with Top. Top, introduce yourself.
What's up, man? Top Lobster here again with you guys. I'm happy and blessed that you're having me back and that you idiots keep showing up to this show. Introduce our guest, man. Bring him in, man. The man of the hour.
Oh, you know how this is something that I was just thinking about. We were talking off air. Eddie Bravo is kind of the flat earth guy, and I'm not going to lie to you, Joel. I'm not gassing you up, but you're my Nephilim guy. Joel Thomas is my Nephilim guy. Joel, can you introduce yourself and tell the people, where they can find you? Let's start there.
Yeah, I'm Joel Thomas, and I've done music for a long time. That's really how I started, really, with everything. So I've done music for like 20 years. I started this movement called the Vantesla movement with another artist about 3 years ago. And Tony Merkel from Merkel Media and the Confessionals caught wind of it through a producer of mine. He reached out to me, ended up in studio with him back when he lived in Philly, and he and I really clicked. So he really liked what I was doing because I was very much against the system. And, he challenged me with some things when I met him. And, as I started growing and progressing, he hit me up several months later and asked me, I want to go on a trip with him to hunt down Dogman. And he was putting a team together. I'm like, brother, I grew up in the North Georgia mountains most of my life. So, I'm used to seeing, bears walk in front of my house when I got up in the morning. So, of course, I'm down. He was like, hey, you got the artillery for it? I was like, dude, I'm not talking about deep state like this if I don't. So absolutely, I'm going to go on the trip. And then it just started snowballing from there. Ended up getting in the podcast game and really started meeting a lot of really cool people through that. A lot of networking that went involved. Started working with some great guys that, really expanded my mind. But in doing that, I really started going real deep into this Nephilim lore and how it connects to what's going on in the world today, because I feel like that people are understanding more and more that there's a spiritual realm and there's some sort of spiritual battle going on, but they don't know exactly what. And there's a lot of people out there that are giving false prophecies and false information to people to help guide them into really on the Nephilim team per se. So I listened to some really great guys that set me on the path. Obviously, Gary Wayne, who's an absolute genius in the field. L.A. Marzulli, another one that's just an absolute genius in the field. When it comes to, what I'm looking at spiritually, Michael Heiser's just been phenomenal before he passed. A lot of these guys are really on that trail. And they've done extensive research. What you do as a researcher yourself, you like certain guys, but then you start digging yourself and start creating your own theories. And last year, with a lot of research, I ended up coming up with this theory called the Nephilim portal babies. And anybody can find the whole lead up to it in a 4.5-hour podcast I ended up doing on the Confessionals about this and what that means in today's context of what the Nephilim are to us today, not just in the past, but they are to us today. So I think that's something that I want people to understand, but also just from a biblical, alchemical way of thinking is something that people don't understand too, that the Bible is an absolute crazy book that when the church got a hold of it early on, and when I say the church, I just mean like Roman Catholicism and a lot of these elite structures that got involved to keep us away from the supernatural piece of it, it got really dumbed down and watered down. So what ended up happening was people got really bored with the Bible and all these rituals and all this stupidness saying that, hey, you got to go to this guy before you can get to God, when actually the book's telling you you can just do it yourself. You can get to God yourself. I mean, that's how it's supposed to be. And what ended up happening on the opposite end of it, you've got all this really cool stuff when it comes to the new age and when it comes to all of these other occult things that people get attracted to because they know there's a spiritual world. So then they run to that side of it because those people are selling them the goods. Well, they think they're the goods. I'm just here along with Tony Merkel and a lot of guys that are in the field with me, literally. We're here to tell the people that, hey, look, this book is super crazy and it's super true. So if you understand that and you can connect the past to now and understand that there's this crazy world that is happening around us right under our noses, I think people will be more prepared for what's going to happen in the future, whether it's tomorrow or 100 years from now. So I think that's basically my take on it, as far as right now goes.
Yeah, let me just say a quick thank you to like guys like you and Tony specifically, because for the last maybe over a year or so, I've been delving more into this realm. I've always been, in conspiracy. I got my come up sort of like in like this pseudo political libertarian realm, and then also the art stuff. But for most of my life, I've been a Christian. For my entire life, and I kind of went into church, went away from it, played guitar in the church, went away from it, got hurt. Like the usual stories of people that.
Classic.
Yeah, exactly.
Same here. I did the same thing.
You find out about like it's a government, a church, and then once you see what's underneath, it's kind of always decrepit and disgusting. But I used to believe the Bible as like I'll say this is a great book. We shouldn't throw it away. And then my argument was it's a great book of like allegories and metaphors, and we should use this as a way to live our life. And I still believe that. But over the last year and a half, listening to Tony and other guys in this realm, once you kick that door open, like Sam Tripoli when he has these guests on, I'm like, oh my God, this book might not be just allegories and tales on how to live your life, although you should look at them that way as well. But like most of this shit is true. Like, Jonah in the belly of the whale, that probably happened. Genesis 6, that probably happened. The story of Noah, all this stuff, that happened. And it's way more fantastic than people want to admit or we are ready to believe. But once you start to think in that lens, a lot of this other stuff that's happening in the world starts to make more sense.
Yeah,
especially
absolutely. And
politically.
side note, there's evidence that the fish that Jonah went inside of wasn't actually a whale. It was a fish that was created specifically for that incident, and it was translucent. So when he was in the belly, he could actually see everything around him, and he knew that he was stuck in the water, essentially, because this fish had to be able to produce the oxygen needed for him to last 3 days. So it's being said that it was probably a fish that was created specifically for that incident to get him in there for 3 days so he could contemplate his next move. Was he actually going to preach the word to Nineveh or not? So that's very fascinating because nobody can survive an actual whale at all. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So it's really cool that you brought that up, because I've done some pretty extensive research on that too. So again,
have you seen the latest video? Could be a hoax. They're saying that like somebody took a video in Antarctica and it's a huge jellyfish looking thing, kind of just like UFO jellyfish floating. I'm thinking of a translucent fish, and a jellyfish comes to mind. I'm like, well, maybe it's like Nephilim shit or.
Well, I tell you what, if you want to talk to somebody about organic UFOs, reach out to Cryptids of the Corn, who are the hottest in the game right now. Those guys will come on here, and Justin is an actual biologist. He was in the field for several years, and these guys will absolutely blow it away. And when you're talking about, he knows everything about that whole jelly incident that went on down in Antarctica, and he can equate it to these jellies that live in the upper atmosphere as well. And he'll tie it into Nope, the movie Nope, which is actually soft disclosure, because there are organic UFOs, which he believes are in the 5 percentile of what we see, but there are organic UFOs. And even biblically, there is scripture that talks about organic UFOs as well. So it's pretty fascinating that you brought that up, because I completely agree with you. I think there's a whole other realm of UFOs that we don't even talk about.
Did you
I feel like
see? Go ahead, Dave.
I was going
Sorry.
to say, I feel like we have to talk to Cryptids of the Corn, because
Yeah.
when I saw Nope, I thought it was such an awesome take. Like it's one of those concepts that's right in front of your face the whole time. But admittedly, I never thought of it. Was this organic UFO? And the whole movie, done through that premise was honestly fantastic. So yeah, I mean, I would love to talk to Cryptids of the Corn. And I wanted to say real quick, it's funny how uh, I see all these people that had this sort of church upbringing and also played music in the church. I don't know if you caught it last episode, Top, but when you said that you played music in the church, you played, was it drums or guitar, you said?
A guitar.
I think then Juan played drums. Juan Ayala of One on One. He said it,
let's
and
make a band.
I don't think you heard it. And I was like, damn, dude, like, what is this? All these guys sort of growing up in the church.
Shout out
I came
to
in
Juan Ayala, because if
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't shout him out, then I
He
get
gets
in trouble
very
with him
upset.
later. Yeah, shout out to the shout
Yeah.
out that
Yeah.
you shouted
Big
out.
shout out to Juan Ayala.
I heard if
I
you
was
don't
thinking
shout him
even
out,
of the vessel.
if you don't shout him out, you might be a homunculus, and maybe a butthole homunculus too. At that, if
Yeah.
depending how he's feeling. But
A homunculus ass baby.
I think you know, in the scripture it says raise a child in the way that they should go. So if you're brought up in the church, if you're playing instruments to that, you're in the church to that level, it's no surprise that you kind of end up here. A lot of people do end up here because, you know, inquisitive minds keep on digging and digging and digging further. Like my big thing in church was my Sunday school teacher. I would constantly quiz her and just make her look through scripture for me, things that I was like fascinated in as like a child, Revelations and other parts of the Bible. And she entertained it, and she actually went. She's like, I don't know, and she'll come back and tell me. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that those kind of people are here now, asking those questions, and for the most part, they're like generally good people, the ones that I've met in real life and even online. You know.
I have something coming up where I'm going to church for the first time, and I'm kind of caught in this weird space where, I always say I came to Christ and these sort of religious ideologies through the back door. I came in through the paranormal and the occult. I had weird experiences growing up. They informed my interests, and then eventually it all led me here. But I'm now wondering, like, do I go there just to experience sort of what I've been hearing from a lot of people, which is that the church really drops the ball in this regard, which is a strange place to drop the ball. If you're having membership issues, nothing is more interesting, especially I would imagine to young men, more so than this idea of other realms and entities and spirituality and everything. But in my research, it seems that there's not a lot of emphasis on, things like, for example, the Nephilim, which I think is great that we have Joel here, because I kind of wanted to get into this more or less a crash course on who the Nephilim were and evidence for them having existed, or maybe even still existing in modern day.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys are ready to get right into it, we can. So, I mean, this is where I have a lot of fun. So, and along the way, any questions you guys have, ask away. If I have the answers, cool. If I don't, I'll just chalk it up to I don't know yet. So, we'll go along with it. But I always like to start with where the Nephilim are first spoke about. The word Nephilim is in the Bible, and it starts in Genesis 6. And I'm going to read a few verses so you guys know where the word Nephilim comes from. And then I'll break down the etymology of what that word means. And we'll even get into the Raphaim. I'll talk about how that giants are talked about all through the Bible. They just aren't always used as the word Nephilim. There are several tribes of giants that are talked about pre-flood and after the flood too. So they do come back. So that's the whole basis of the Nephilim showing back up now too, because they're actually all through the Bible up until you get to the New Testament, which is a whole different era because you're looking at a big gap of time between. And I've got some theories on that too, but we'll definitely talk about how it starts. It starts in Genesis 6:1, when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them. The sons of God, which are fallen angels, by the way, because if you go into the context of the Hebrew, what sons of God means, it means the literal angelic sons of God. Some of we were just talking about the dumbing down of the church. They want to say that those were some sort of tribe of men that took these women and they defiled them, they raped them, right? I don't necessarily think it was rape in the sense of they forcefully took these women. I think these angelic creatures were so beautiful and so mesmerizing. They basically hypnotized these women into having sex with them so they could create these Nephilim creatures or their own sons. And we'll get to some of that a little bit later too.
Can I interject for a sec?
Sure, go ahead.
Timothy Alberino is along the line of thinking that it was a trade. So technology for women and
so
that kind of thing.
I'm big on that as well.
Yeah.
And part of the Nephilim portal babies theory that I have does constitute that thought pattern too. And I'll talk about specific fallen angels that are talked about here after a while in the book of Enoch that taught men specific technologies in a trade to get access to these women. But I don't think that these women, even though that they were served up by these men who wanted this technology, that they didn't want it, like, or at least in some depraved way wanted it because of this hypnosis almost that these angelic beings could have put on them. So I do think that, shout out to Juan Ayala. I just saw that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, big shout out Juan Ayala.
So I do think that there was a trade. You're not wrong. And Timothy Alberino is another one that's fantastic on a lot of these subjects too. So completely agree with you for sure. So the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These are the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So that's our first introduction in the Bible to who the Nephilim are. And some people, again, they're and I'm going to get to the etymology here in a minute, but the etymology can mean a few different things. So there are some disparities on what some people think that the word Nephilim means, but in most translations, it does translate over to giant. So, and the fact that there are so many giants that show up afterwards in different contexts, it just lends to the fact that this is how they were created. They were created by fallen angels having sex with women, and that these giants were produced after that.
You know, it's every time I start thinking about this particular moment, I can't help but draw correlations to all of these ancient deities that people worshipped over time. One of the things that I talk about often is this correlation I stumbled upon between Baal and Zeus, and how it seems like this is an interchangeable character. They were one and the same. And that, you know, the Greek pantheon were actually the fallen, and then you have, you know, this expression of the heroes of old when it comes to the Nephilim, and that immediately brings to mind characters like Hercules. And don't press me on anymore. What's the other guy's name with the P? He's the guy that slayed
Prometheus.
Medusa.
You got Poseidon. And so with the Greek culture, which is fascinating, you've got this whoring goddess Gaia. And she finds, and I say whoring because she's having sex with just like multiple gods like all the time, and creating these demigods and creating these other gods. So that's kind of how it starts with her in Greek culture, right? So she's got this part-time mate in Tartaros, which you can connect Tartaros to the New Testament, which is Tartarus. And then that also connects to Tartary or Tartaria, and I can go down a whole rabbit hole on how I think that that's all underground, that I don't think any of that whole Tartary psyop, and yeah, I said psyop, is real. I think there's pieces of it that are, but I do not think that this was some sort of mass level flood, these mud floods that happen. Listen, mud floods happen all the time. This isn't something that's not happening now. I don't think it was a mass mud flood extinction level event. I do think giants were involved. I think Tartary may have existed on the maps underground. I think maybe those maps, and I know that the translation over out east, the translation for that is undiscovered land. But I also think there's a level of maybe that this Tartary existed underground in what some would consider hollow earth, or maybe at least tunneling systems that happen underground. And these giants who I think are underground right now, I think they were coming out and they were causing some sort of destruction during this time. So again, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. And I've talked about Tartaria many times before. I just think that it's very similar to some of these other psyops that have popped up over the years that catch a lot of wind, that catch a lot of steam, and everybody jumps on board with it. One thing I'm very careful about when something catches super, super hard and super fast and it becomes very polarizing, I'm like, who started it really? Like, there's probably elements to it that's true, very, very much like QAnon. Like, there's a lot of truth coming out of that camp, but it's a psyop. It's not real. It's not it's something that was manufactured by people behind the scenes to throw us off the trail. And I personally believe that there are great elements to Tartaria, but I don't think as a whole that it actually exists. But that's just a little side note off on Tartaros. But yeah, so Gaia has sex with Tartaros, creates Uranus, Pontus, Aurea. Uranus and the Cyclops had a large single eye in the middle of their forehead. You got Argus, Brontus, Steropus. You've got Albion, which was fathered by Poseidon. He was one of the Titans. So I believe that these Greek Titans were demigods, were the Nephilim. I think Gaia and some of these other ones were fallen angels that created these Nephilim, and these were the stories that were passed down to the Greek culture. I think this is when the Greeks got a hold of it and they were manipulated by fallen angels. Like, okay, so this is the story that needs to be told, right? Because Zeus isn't even the creator. Even though we look at Zeus as being like the top of the echelon, he actually came later. So Zeus wasn't even like the all creator. There was an all creator that created this, which in actuality, when you look at who this creator in Greek culture mimics, it actually mimics Abaddon, or who we would call Satan in the biblical context. So I think this is part of a deception that happened with Greek culture. Here's the thing. All these cultures mirror each other in a certain way. The only issue that I have with some of these other pantheons is the pantheon of the gods. You've got these pantheons that you're told to worship all of them, whereas I believe that the Bible specifically says that you're only supposed to worship Yahweh, the one true creator. But I also don't think that even the Bible speaks outside of context that there weren't other gods, because we know that in Psalms 82:1, it talks about Elohim judge the Elohim, that God judged the gods. So we know there's some sort of divine counsel as well. I just think it comes to what you believe in. And at that point, you got to, make a decision. Okay, do I live in a world where I think everything's fake? All that happens that comes out of religion and everything else is fake, right? We live in a matrix. So at that point, why even care anymore? Why even wake up in the morning if that's what you believe? I think the Matrix was created as a psyop to get us off the track of what we're supposed to believe and following an actual creator and understanding who that is. Just personal opinion. Again, if people don't like it, that's cool.
No, I agree with you, man. Like we kind of went into this territory with Juan, like right off the bat. It was last week exactly when they did that stupid broadcast
shout out to
thing.
Juan.
Shout out to Juan again. Yeah, I'm definitely not from a butthole homunculus. What's up, Juan? Yeah, like right off the bat, like he doesn't really know us. He doesn't know us at all, and I only know him from like listening. And they did the broadcast thing, and I was like, yo, some crazy shit happened to me. And he kind of like jumped on me. He's like, listen, like we're not doing fear porn here. And
Right.
I'm trying like, yeah, it really happened. But I'm like, exactly that. There's so much of this like fear mongering that they want to kind of bring you down with, but it's always interlaced with truth. Like the Matrix is like a possibly like interlaced with some true stories, or at least like what you take away from it.
Right.
But the message overall is very black pilling, right? So you kind of have to get to this like this black belt level of like, I can listen to this stuff and then brush it off, use it for my knowledge, and keep moving. Although
Right.
I don't know how much I can actually do that. Maybe I'm fooling myself that I can, because I feel like you're leaving a part of your spirit behind every time you do take part in these activities. But like it's almost mandatory at this point. Like if you want to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And I'm very much against the fear porn narrative. I don't like it. I don't like it when I see people doing it and making money off of it. You know, you got people that are shills that are making money off of fear porn and they know what they're doing, but people are following them because they're worried about the end times. Listen, God didn't put us here to not enjoy earth. You know, what I really hate about Christianity is this whole narrative of we got to get to heaven because we don't want to go to hell. And at the end of the day, that's not the purpose of Christianity or Yeshua. The purpose is to have a relationship with him so you can connect to other people and we can live our best life here on earth. Because guess what? Earth was created, it's our domain. We're supposed to be taking care of it. And we're so worried about what the government's doing and everything else that we lose sight of that. And listen, it's fun to dig deep. I have a blast doing it. It's not for everybody. Some people get going and they can't get out. And they don't know how to decipher between what's a psyop, what's not a psyop. And if you don't have that root grounding, in my opinion, in God, then you're just not going to be able to sift through that the right way. Um, Shout out to Juan again, but Juan and I had talked off air on the phone recently, and he said, sometimes, man, I'm reading certain books. I got to put them down, man, and pray because I know that this has got a deep, underrooted occult hold to it. And if I'm not careful, these things can attack me. And I know personally from experience in my past of walking a path, trying to connect with the occult and achieving that and going down these roads that these entities exist. They will manifest you. They will talk to you. And it's got nothing to do with being on shrooms or whatever else. In stone cold sober state, they will show up. If you're asking for them to show up and you got something to offer, they're going to. It's inevitable. And I think that what we have to do in this space is be responsible on how we're trying to help people, because what I really like, I'm really against this matrix narrative. The more that I look into it, the more that I read about it, I actually despise it because it is absolutely set up to keep us away from God. There's just no way it's not, because at that point you are manipulated from birth, which we are essentially. There are a lot of quote unquote matrices that are created to keep us off our God-given path. Absolutely. We got the media, we've got the Rockefellers who have owned education system since 100 years ago. We know these are matrices. These are your real matrices. The Operation Mockingbirds, those are your real matrices. I just don't think we're in a matrix where we're in a video game and somebody's manipulating us that we don't have any control over. I don't agree with that.
Yeah,
You know, oh, I'm sorry, Top. This idea of the Matrix and how it's a black pilled kind of a thing. Um, but it, like Top was saying, does have elements that you can draw from where you can find bits of truth in there. And I think that people need to keep in mind that in order to construct the best lie, you have to maintain a close parallel to the truth. And then there's only key aspects of that you sort of bastardize. So this idea that we're in this realm that was, that there's a creator and a purpose to it all. Well, yeah, we already had that. This simulation theory thing is it's like if somebody took Christianity or Catholicism and they just wrung everything out of it and shook it out and just gave you this like kind of empty napkin where it's like sort of the structure is still there, but it's been homogenized and sterilized and all of the value has been wrung out of it. I don't really have these black pill moments anymore. I think people that are going through that are sort of like new to the dance, because I do think that the black pill is something that maybe you do kind of go through. Like when you start to peel the layers back on everything and you start to see that the world around you doesn't make sense and you're finding explanations that key in but are not going along with the general consensus, you do start to feel. I was uncovering this trail when I was a teenager. And I guess I forget, but I was black pilled as a teenager. I thought any day they were going to convert my local Walmart to a FEMA camp and shit was going to hit the fan. And I was like really, really tight about it. And I remember going to all my friends. I was that psycho. I was like 17 years old telling all my friends that like fluoride is corroding their pineal gland and any day now, World War III is gonna pop out. Shout out to Juan Ayala, real quick. Shout out to Juan. But yeah, I do think that maybe what we're seeing now with this epidemic of black pilling, especially on the social media sites, is people who just kind of got to the
Yeah,
dance,
it's like white
and it's
belts.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's adults. And dude, I feel a lot of empathy for people that are just starting to discover you can lose your mind as a kid and bounce back. It's much harder to lose your mind as a 30-something-year-old father, husband, somebody with a business. I mean, I couldn't even have imagined trying to keep my hands on the steering wheel of something like a business while I was discovering all of the things that, are being sort of talked about now in these spaces. Um,
This I want to address this super chat real quick. This is my realm here. Uh,
mm,
for years, black pilled in like the political space, because once you really understand how this political system works and operates, it's pretty easy to say, wow, there's really no fixing this shit unless you want to like completely destroy it, and then what will you put in? What will you rebuild in its path? And then you go down anarcho capitalism. There's not really good answers to that question there. Then monarchy and all this nonsense. I decided the best approach is comedy, man. Like I can joke about stuff, but tell you the truth, and hopefully not drive you crazy at the same time. Like you got to laugh at this world. It's gone completely mad. You also have to understand it so you can navigate it correctly. But if you sit there and take these things very seriously, like, oh my God, Joe Biden cut funding to the border wall. Now he's funding the border wall again, and now he's funding Israel, but now he's not, and now he's giving money. You know what, dude? They're gonna do this shit anyway, man. Like I said, kind of like enjoy the show, pay attention to what's going on so you can navigate correctly, but understand that this is all like weird Nephilim shit. This is stuff beyond our power. Understand what you can. Focus on the spiritual. I would say focus on the spiritual and the things that are going to affect you. But also see what's if there's a war in Israel, maybe you want to move some money around or start to do some stuff in the home front to figure out how you might be affected.
Yeah, you're right. And look for solutions, not ranting and raving all the time about what's happening. That's not doing anybody any good. It's one thing to wake people up, but again, you can't wake people up that don't want to be woke up either. So you got to stop getting mad about that and you letting those people go. You can still be friends with them. You can still connect with them with their family members. Nothing wrong with that. Your goal isn't to wake those people up. I think that's what we have to start realizing too, that if somebody's ready to hear something, there's one thing about dropping breadcrumbs here and there to pique people's interest. It might be something that they're talking about that you can say, hey, you ever thought about it this way? Oh, I never did. Yeah, just, think about it. Walk off. Let it go. Let it simmer. Let that seed grow over the next few months. And maybe then they're starting to pay attention. Like, hey, man, something's not right here. Here, let me help you out. You just don't want to come busting out reptilians off the rip when you meet somebody that's not open-minded to that. You want to hit them with something probably a little more geopolitical in that realm, at least something they can understand tangibly, like money and power. Once you can hit somebody with something like that, they're a little more understanding to then maybe a year or two down the road, you're hitting them with reptilians and Zeta reticulans and all this other stuff, right? You go all draconians, all that. You can get into all that later. But most people aren't ready to do that out the gate, not unless they've had some sort of paranormal experience and they just know, like, man, I know I saw something crazy. At that point, they're wide open. They're ready to go. But I do think that we have to be understanding with people, and we don't need to just look at people like sheep, because we're doing no better than what the governments and elite do to us. We're dehumanizing others. We're dehumanizing people who we think are on our level. And what does that make us? We have an elite mindset now. And that's something that I'm seeing a lot of in the truther community. Everybody's got the real truth. That's something that just that's really mind blowing to me is flat earth. Flat earthers will never acknowledge the fact that they could be wrong. That's the thing that irritates me. It's okay, you've done all this research and you have this belief system. I have no issue with that. But the issue I have is that you can't be wrong, and you want to get so mad that you want to punch somebody in the face. I've heard podcasters say that on air I'll punch somebody in the face if they don't believe in flat earth. That's ridiculous. That is counterproductive to what you're trying to do in the first place. So to me, you have to look at those aspects when you're trying to break theories out. These are all theories. Until you've gone up high enough to touch the firmament and you've gone far enough across in Antarctica to see the ice wall for yourself, you cannot tell me for a fact that that's true. It's not. It's just not. And I'm not sitting here saying that I have all the facts, because I don't. I'm wrong more often than not as I'm seeking the truth, because I'm constantly finding where, oh man, I dug a little deeper. This is a little bit more different than I thought. I've changed my mind. The Anunnaki, I used to think that the Anunnaki were Nephilim. I do not believe that now, because the deeper research that I did, I believe the Anunnaki were fallen angels. I think that they created the Agigi. They created these Nephilim. They created the pre-Adamite man. That's what I believe now. But that took me time. I had to do research and do digging. And I'm very quick to say if I'm wrong about something. I think in this space, you have to be more often than not ready to say that you're wrong about something than just holding on to some ideology because it's, you watch 3 documentaries and that's the truth.
Can you tell us more about the pre-Adamite men, because that's something that I've thought about but never really looked much into.
Yeah, so I did like a 2.5-hour special on the confessionals called Old Earth and Lucifer's Domain. So I do talk about pre-Adamite man. So there's a lot of verses in the Bible that allude to the fact that the earth is billions of years old, which I personally think that it is. I don't believe in the 6,000 year narrative. I just don't think that the Bible even states that. The first 2 verses in the Bible, there's what they call the gap theory between those 2 verses. It says God created the heavens and the earth. But then it says the earth was without form and void. So none of that makes sense when you're looking at it from the context of he created it. Well, he always creates something perfectly. Well, why is it in the second verse that it's without form and void, which in the Hebrew is tohu vabohu, which means to tear something up. Essentially, tohu vabohu would be if I just like tore all these books up behind me. They were put together perfectly behind me, but then I tore it up. That's what tohu vabohu means. That's what that particular verse means. It was made formless and void is what it means. So there's proof in the Bible itself that there is a massive gap of time that God didn't really think that was very imperative for us to know about. Like, it's not in the context of our relationship, our walk with him, it's not that important. So I believe that when you start looking at extracurricular biblical texts, when you start digging into Sumerian lore and you start looking at some of these other ancillary tablets and books, you start being able to piece a little bit of that together. And at the end of the day, guys, I could be dead wrong. I could be wrong about all of it. But I do a lot of research, and I really like the correlation between the Agigi, which were the first creation of the from the Sumerians. They were created to build waterways, to do all the slave labor. I know people attribute it to finding gold, but they were before Adam and the Adamites. They were before that, but they ended up rebelling. And to me, there's a really cool correlation there between Cain in the Bible when he kills Abel and he gets basically kicked out and told by God to leave. Well, God puts a mark on him so others will not harm him. He's scared to go out into the world. Why is Cain scared? He's scared about people that are already out there. So you've got Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. That's it. Cain kills Abel, and now he's scared about others killing him. So God curses him, and basically, like, whatever you try to grow, it's not going to happen. That's why he becomes a great builder. And that's where the Brotherhood of the Snake, which was the precursor to Freemasonry, happens when he and his son Enoch, not Enoch that walked with God in Seth's bloodline, which was seven generations down, but this was the first Enoch, which was Cain's son, and he and his son build, magic number, 66 cities. So how did they build all these cities? Just the 2 of them. And even if Cain was to take a couple of wives from the lineage of Adam and Eve, say a couple sisters, the amount of time it would take to produce enough children to build 66 cities, and even with the help of fallen entities, the Nephilim weren't there yet. So this happened 7 generations down. This is closer to the deluge. So I believe, and I like to use the word Agigi when I'm speaking about pre-Adamite man, because I think that is a very cool term that was used in Sumerian lore. That I think I think there was a pre-Adamite man that was before Tohu Vabohu, before Formless and Void. I think maybe they got away either underneath the earth in a hollow earth, or through portaling systems into another dimension where fallen angels were able to usher them there and then bring them back later. So I think all of these are wide open possibilities, but I do think that there was a pre-Adamite man that was very close to what mankind or Adam and Eve were later on.
Let me ask you one thing. So you said that the Nephilim came after, they came fall like 7 generations after Cain. Okay, because there's the tell the theory, David, about what Paul says.
About what? Who says?
Paul
Paul.
yeah.
Okay, so there's a guy named Paul. He's got a show on YouTube. Shout out to Paul. Called Understanding Conspiracy.
Shout
it's
out
a
to
great
Paul and
show,
Juan.
and shout out to Paul and Juan. Shout out to Juan. And he's got a great series and a really excellent, well-researched theory on the idea that the modern day visage of the clown is actually a sort of homage to the Nephilim. And the way he draws those correlations is through the mark of Cain, right? So I'm not versed in the Bible, but it's my understanding that there was a mark that was put upon Cain so that, like you were talking about, he doesn't get murdered for the crime that he's committed. And that mark, the way that Paul interprets it, is a sort of pale skin, and he connects that with also the idea that the Nephilim had sort of this fiery red hair, and then he goes into the connections with the seraphim and what their skins supposedly look like. It was, that it had this sort of reptilian aspect to it. Even the red makeup around the mouth is done to enlarge the mouth to make it look bigger than it actually is. The red nose is because the Nephilim were essentially cannibals and fed on human beings. And so it was supposed to kind of create this almost bloody image. They also have these oftentimes, especially when you see Pennywise. Pennywise is kind of the perfect example of it. He's got these lines of blue, and what it's supposed to be, they go across his eyes, and it's supposed to sort of be a depiction of a reptilian eye. You know how they have slitted eyes? And so even down to the shoes, where they're wearing these gigantic, goofy shoes or gigantic clown-like gloves, right, where their hands look bigger, it is to emphasize the size of these creatures. They'll even hold little tiny umbrellas, another one meant to emphasize the actual scale of these beings. And I'm telling you, man, I mean, he lays it out in such a compelling way. We did like a 2.5-hour podcast, and we could have kept going. I really think Paul is onto something.
But he's saying that the timelines don't match. This is the interesting part. You're saying that came much further. Like if the Nephilim came after Cain, then it wouldn't make sense for the people, the pre-Adamite people there, to be fearful of the appearance that God would have put on. That's what I'm not trying to call anyone. I'm just trying to make, because it's such a great theory, but like if the timelines don't match, then
I've heard some of the theory, and I haven't had time to delve into it myself to really put together his timelines and what he said, and I don't want to speak on it like that. And I do think, just from the few people that have told me about this theory, there's probably some truth to it, or at least it makes sense in some sphere, right? But one of the things that I think is a misnomer with people in Nephilim, that they looked one specific way, and there's proof throughout different cultures that there were different races of Nephilim. And I say race loosely, as far as the color of skin. We know that in South America there were darker skinned Nephilim, so it's not just like they were redheaded, pale skinned, or blonde hair either. Throughout the world there were different versions of Nephilim. We can also say that there were versions of Nephilim that were cryptids. The Moabites in the Bible were lion men. They had lion heads, and David and his mighty men fought these Moabites. So this is another version of Nephilim. There's so many different ones throughout history that we can talk about that aren't just a specific Nephilim. Now, if we're talking about the originators, see, one thing I want to be real careful about biblically is saying that someone's skin was cursed and turned a different color, because then we have to start getting into race theory. And now we're going to say, okay, well, if his skin was cursed and he turned white, well, then what was he? Now we're landing into the Black Israelite theory, which I think
Yeah.
is the black version
white
of the
devil.
KKK. And that's my personal opinion. So now we have to be very careful about what we're talking about when it comes to the color of their skin changing. And I've talked to Gary Wayne on air, and he has talked about there were many cultures that talk about giants and Nephilim that were of all color varieties. So I don't know. Again, let me look into it and get back to you guys. I know it's a hot one right now, and everybody's on the clown Nephilim. Could be some great truth to it. I hear the guy's phenomenal. Again, I don't know him, and I haven't heard him break down the theory the way that he has. And I'm sure he's got some biblical proof to it that he can map out. But again, we're just in a space cooking up theories, guys. Like, we're trying to figure out what happened in the past. You know, at the end of the day, none of us really know. We're just speaking our truth, and then we have the right a week, a year, however farther along from now, to change our minds with the evidence of other digging and research.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm super racist against Nephilim. And I think we could say, yeah,
Can we say that? Are we allowed to say that?
I'm allowed to say that. I don't give a shit.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm allowed to say it. Joel's definitely not allowed to say it. His skin's way too late. You were talking before, Joel, about this, and I want to ask you a question, but first I want to get this out of the way. It's like we're gonna be wrong sometimes, and this idea that there is this hierarchy of like people in the truther community that swear that they've got it pinned down, and then if you deviate from that, there's like real arguments laying out ahead of you. You know, you're gonna have some harsh words with some people, and I just want people to know that when you've been looking at this sort of thing for, not to toot my own horn, but as long as I have, it's been like 16 years. You know how much I was wrong? I was wrong I fell for so many things. So I'm never going to stand up here and you know, claim to know the definitive truth about something.
Right.
And I think people need to kind of shake that off, that rigidity off of them, in order to be able to have conversations like this, and then hopefully maybe one day end up at something that at least, closely resembles the truth. I want to ask you about specifically Noah, the reason for the flood, how it relates to the Nephilim, and then these theories that because I was actually asked this today, and I'm biblically illiterate for the most part, so I just didn't have the time to do the research and respond to them, and so hopefully they watch this because I'm never going to tweet back at them. But what is the evidence for them having survived the flood? And also, where's the evidence for the flood being in great deal due to their presence and corrupting of mankind?
Okay, cool. So that kind of gets me back to the beginning where I was before we derailed, and not in a bad way, guys, because this happens on podcasts all the time. And I use derail in a
if
great
you're
way.
on a podcast with me, I'm going to derail all day
It's
long.
fun.
Man.
Yeah,
Tower
it's gonna
Gang is
happen.
like, is a derailment. It's a whole train crash. Like
Yeah,
casualties.
I just trade crash. Yeah, very much so. So Nephilim is also brought up again in Numbers 13, 32, and 33, where 10 of the 12 spies came back from when Moses sent them into the promised land. So at this point, they've left the Egyptians. This is after the parting of the Red Sea. This is after the 10 Commandments. They are at the promised land. Moses has sent them in there to scout it out for like, I think it was 40 days, then come back and give him, the knowledge. Like, hey, how do we need to take this land back? How do we need to take our land back? Well, where the 10 of the 12 spies report that they have seen fearsome giants in Canaan. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So 10 of the 12 spies, outside of Joshua and Caleb, who were like all about it. They're like, man, we got the power of God, man. We can go take them. I don't care. Like they saw these giants who were massive. They were ready to go, but the other 12 were scared. So that actually put Israel in the desert for 40 years until everybody that didn't want to go in there died off. And there was a whole new generation that came after that. And in these 40 years, Joshua and Caleb still survived all that because they were supposed to, and they actually lead the charge to go back in there and take out all these giants. This is after the flood. This is after the flood that the Nephilim show back up. So we're talking about the sons of Anak, the Anakin from Star Wars. A lot of these names play into ancient gods and Nephilim, even in our pop culture today.
Man.
So the Nephilim were said to have a lot of different abilities very similar to their fathers. Some were said to have shapeshift. Psychic abilities and psionic abilities were very normal for them. Opening portals was, nothing. A couple sigils in there moving across the earth through ley lines like it's nothing. They learned this from their fathers. So Nephilim were especially like the first generation, which were said to be in the 30 to 40 foot range. Those are like the original Nephilim that were said to be in that range. Now, after the flood, you typically see ones more in that 10 foot to 18 foot range. Like Goliath was more in the 11 foot, 12 foot range than the previous Nephilim, which you see more of the word Raphaim and some of these other names for giants after the flood. So these were kind of like the watered down, I say the watered down version. 18 feet's not watered down in my opinion, but it's still watered down from what this first generation was. So from what I've understood, there's a couple of ways these giants could have come back after the flood, because the flood was created to wipe out anything that wasn't of God, because these fallen entities wanted to disrupt everything. In the book of Jasher, it talks about the fallen angels having sex with animals to even disrupt those lineages from what God created as well. So these fallen entities are just trying to disrupt it all. Oddly enough, in the book of Giants, which is a Dead Sea Scrolls, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were unearthed, they are a lot of times lumped in with the book of Enoch, the first book of Enoch. So Mahaway and Gilgamesh come to Enoch because they know he walks with God. They're having these dreams about this deluge, this flood coming, and it's going to kill them. So they go to Enoch because he's like the only one walking on the face of the earth that they think is going to be able to give them what they need to know. So he's like, all right, listen, I'm going to go talk to God. I'm going to come back to you. So he actually comes back to him and he says, listen, yeah, there's a flood coming, but if you turn to God, then you'll be saved. So even the giants were offered salvation from God himself. So that just lets you know the encompassing love that God has for anything. Because listen, if you were a giant, it's not like you chose to be born that way. It's not like, man, I was born a giant. But typically these giants who are very bloodthirsty were a lot like their fathers. I mean, listen, they grew up with fallen angels as their fathers. They grew up in this mentality. And I like to believe maybe there was a few that just weren't having it at some point. Maybe they were a rebellious son or daughter that were just like, man, no, I'm going to go this other way. It's a possibility, right? Everything's on the table.
I don't want to eat these humans anymore, Dad.
Right, exactly. Actually,
so shut up and eat the humans. Or go to your giant room.
So in saying that, the ones that didn't, everybody that didn't, they were wiped out by this deluge. When it says that Noah was perfect in God's eyes, they were not talking about him in his walk with God, in his spirituality. They were talking about his DNA. His DNA was untainted because from his line, which moves into the bloodline of David, was where Yeshua was coming to save us in the future. So that needed to be an untainted bloodline that they came from. So that was the point of the flood, was to put these people on the ark to then after the flood for that bloodline to continue. Now we know after the flood, these giants show back up. How did this happen? Well, I've heard several theologians speculate on a myriad of different ways that this is possible. One, a second incursion. There could have been a new group of fallen angels that came afterwards and had sex with females again and created this new incursion of giants. My only pushback a little bit on that is the fact that we don't see these typical just ridiculous sized giants after the flood. It's this new group, this Raphaim, this whole new kind of genre. that comes out of after the flood. So for me, maybe. I'm not saying it's off the table, but I do know like the first group got penalized for it. They got thrown in a lake of fire until the end times in Revelation where they're released. So at the end of the day, that's when I think that those angels will be released, and that's according to the book of Revelation. But here's the other theory that I like a lot, that there were underground systems, whether by portal or interdimensional spaces that fallen angels occupy, and they were able to move these giants and move whatever else that they were creating. Chimera, we know that Chimera existed during these times. They were splicing DNA left and right. So why wouldn't they move some of these creatures and some of these things to these interdimensional spaces or these interdimensional worlds to then bring back and then maybe start procreating? And maybe that's why that these Raphaim were a little bit more of a watered down version of what the Nephilim were pre-flood.
Damn. You know what? You know what's kind of spooky to me? And this is gonna sound very eugenicist, but like, it seems like the bloodline thing is very important to God, at least biblically. And and these days, every time I look around, there's like an open campaign about diversity going on. And I was like, is there something like more important to this blood? Again, I'm not getting into like this far right territory, but it's something for me to think about and really chew on, because like I'm stepping on some toes here, and like this is a dangerous thought. As I'm saying it, I'm like, this this is putting me in like Christopher Cantwell territory. But I like to think it, because something is going on here. What are they telling us? What should we be protecting? What's actually important? We're not really sure. I'm not really sure. I don't know.
Well, you know, they say that RH negative is supposedly the bloodline that is super connected to Nephilim bloodlines. So most people that are RH negative have some super close affinity to the paranormal in a myriad of different ways. So I know that has, again, talked about by several theologians. But here's a thought, too, that when Yeshua came, he didn't come just to save the Jews. He came to save the Gentiles as well. And I think at some point, like, we've all been kind of tainted throughout history in some way. We don't know how. We don't know how that is. And that's why I think there's not a definitive, like, oh, this race is better than another race. Now, I do think that there are organizations at work that want to keep us fighting each other, because, again, racism keeps our eyes off the ball on what's really going on, which is classism. And classism is the elites versus us. And if you look at elites throughout history, they have been every color possible. It does not exist in space where elites were not working with each other. If you see them now, you would know globally that there are elites in every part of the world that are all connected together and working together. This whole narrative of somebody's race being better than someone else's, or they're the God's chosen people, which I absolutely despise right now, because one, people who say that their race is God's chosen people, how do you know? How can you track your line back enough to know that that is an absolute fact? You don't. And there's no way you can possibly tell me that. And I'm not going to adhere to that, because I don't think that that's why God wanted us here, was to fight over what we look like at all. Only the elites want us to do that.
That's the racism that I've been beating the drum on since Saturday, because I'm very much a shit poster on Twitter. If you follow me on there, I've gained like quite the following, saying things that people aren't supposed to say. But one of the things that bothers me the most is like you said, the God's chosen people kind of thing. And I just tweeted the other day, or yesterday or today, I don't even know. I said, these aren't the same Jews that we're talking about in the Bible, just to see what people would think. And you know what? A lot of people were like, yeah, probably not, because number one, who knows? Number two, would they be acting like this? Like, a lot of these things that have been going on, I don't want to forget it. Go back to what we were talking about. I'm not moving to geopolitics.
Just
not
a
today.
side note, and I'm going to slide this one in, then we'll jump off of it and get back on these ancient Nephilim stuff. And this does tie into Nephilim as well. What people think are the Jews, are the Khazarian mafia, who has been in power for a long time, in Ukraine and a lot of these other areas. And this power, these bloodlines, are coming from Nephilim bloodlines. These Rothschilds, they are not Jewish. They want you to believe that they are, because when the Khazarian mafia started getting, and we use mafia loosely, but the Khazarian tribes, When they took over that area of land, they needed a religion, and they brought 3 religions before them. They brought Judaism, they brought Christianity, and they brought Islam before them. Well, they realized if they picked Christianity or Islam, they'd be fighting the other. But they knew if they picked Judaism, that it would be the perfect blanket for them to hide behind. And then they shifted into this being Jewish. I mean, there's even thought patterns and some levels of truth that we'll just say a ruler of Germany at one time was actually from this Rothschild bloodline too, that he was actually implemented into power to facilitate this. And he was actually what people would consider a Jew. And he hid behind this elite blanket of who he really was. And but this all comes from the Nephilim. These bloodlines, when they are passed down through the Khazarian mafia and whoever else in these elite bloodlines, the 13 bloodlines, people say they typically say the 13 bloodlines or reptilian. I don't believe that at all. I think these are Nephilim bloodlines. I think these come from, here's the thing. Why do they think they're better than us? It's not because they have more money and power. It's because they literally come from the gods, or at least they believe that they come from the gods. These fallen angels, the blood of Isis is what they call it. The genealogy of Isis. So I think that this is why they believe that, because they believe they're better than us because they are of the gods. But anyway, that's
I was just about to ask you too. You answered it before I asked you. This idea that these elite families are of the Nephilim bloodline or of Nephilim descent, which is why there's so much inbreeding within these families. And it's why they separate us with trivial things like race or, class or, religion, whatever it is, because the real issue is a DNA issue, a bloodline issue. It's the reason that Noah and his family were preserved. And it's the same fight that is continued all the way till modern day. Excuse me. And these big, Rothschilds or Rockefellers, things of that nature. Is it your contention that these elite family bloodlines are of Nephilim descent?
They are, or they're protecting it. Because I think that the real elites, we don't even know who they are. I really think that the Rothschilds and Rockefellers are just gatekeepers, or at least the front men for somebody people can point fingers at and say, those are the guys that are ruling the world. They're not ruling the world. I can tell you right now that elite bloodlines won't even know who they are. And they are moving across the globe in a way that the constructs of nations don't even exist to them. This is their playground, the entire world. It doesn't exist that way.
Do you think the reptilians are like the Watchers, are the fallen angels? Because there's a lot of they had serpentine-like features and things like that.
I don't. And that's just personally. I think they would fall more of a cryptid or a Nephilim descent. And I think that was some sort of DNA splicing there, howbeit maybe fallen angels having sex with something that's a reptile, or there was something created behind the scenes with this too. Also, here's a really interesting thought, and we will definitely get to this down the road on this when I start talking to what Nephilim portal babies are. But one thing that people don't talk about enough is fallen angels exist now, and they are known to be biblically shapeshifters, and they can shapeshift into anything. So they can take on the form of what I think reptilians a lot of times are. So it's a possibility that those are fallen angels masquerading as reptilians. Now, if we're talking about the actual cryptid version of reptilians, which I think exists too, I think no. I think it's something to do with DNA splicing behind the scenes, whether it's government that they learn this technology from fallen entities, or if it is the product of fallen entities actually doing their own DNA splicing. I think
you caught Tony's latest episode with the dude with that 97 alien tape?
No, I didn't. We talked about it on the phone, but I didn't get a chance to listen to it.
It's a 3-hour episode, and towards the end, he drops a bomb where he's like, no one's talking about this certain type of alien. There's an acronym for it, but it's basically it's like an engineered type of alien race or species, and that's the newest one that the government is apparently kind of looking at. So what you're saying there, this kind of engineered alien Nephilim, whatever it may be, it's around. What does it look like? We're not sure.
Absolutely. And I think grays would fall into that category too. And we'll get into what I think about gray aliens because they're a huge part of this Nephilim portal baby theory that I have, because they've shown up throughout history culturally. You can see them on like hieroglyphs in Egypt on the walls, which is very interesting that these characters pop up, and even reptilians pop up a lot too. These dragon gods, these bipedal dragon looking gods throughout history. So, again, I think that these are technologies that we had way back then and that they're showing back up again. Even with like IVF and some of that stuff right now, with being able to basically create your human in a petri dish. I mean, celebrities are doing it, right? You got Kanye
CRISPR.
and Paris Hilton and all that. Yeah, CRISPR's huge. I just was at a conference this past weekend and I did my presentation on ancient CRISPR is what I called it. So I think that this whole thing has been happening since before Adam. I'm talking like in old Earth, that we've seen a lot of merging of technologies and DNA splicing to create beings that fallen angels want to use for their own nefarious purposes.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you think about that in like a true historical lens, not just 6,000, 7,000 years ago, or even 14 when they're talking about Younger Dryas, but like from the actual beginning of time, we're still in our infancy of technology.
Yeah,
we're just like basically just rubbing sticks together, but we think that we're the shit. We can barely get this to work.
Or that's what they want us to think. And then behind the scenes, there's a lot more that they have access to, that they know in conjunction with these entities that I think a lot of governments think are alien. And I think governments are kind of stupid, to be honest with you. I think there's an elite class of like upper elites that know what's going on. And I think everybody else just gets a little bit. Like, oh, these aliens, let's work with these aliens. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Like, they're beings, they're interdimensional beings that are tricking you. Now, there's an elite class that understands that, and they're working with them completely. But when you're looking at governments, and I just think governments are kind of stupid. They're just puppets. All these governments are puppets. They're not really in the know. You know what I mean?
The hierarchy seems, from what I'm deducting, you've got like regular people, and then some government agencies, and then you have these alien grays. And then beyond that, you've got Antarctica and their government there, and then the reptilians that are telling them what to. I imagine a reptilian in a lab coat, like Spider-Man, and they're just telling these people what to do. And then above that, you've got who knows how many more classes, but like at the top, you've got Satan, the fallen, and then from down there. Yeah. So we're so detached from what's actually going on.
Right. and again, back to the fallen. What are they shape-shifting into from time to time, just to take on the guise of some of these things, depending on the situation, right? I think some of these abductions are fallen entities as well that are just, masquerading as grays, because I look at things, even cryptids, in the context of it's a multitude of different things. You got metaphysical, you got physical, you got government created, you got probably fallen angel created. There's so many different versions of it that everybody's not seeing the same thing. And I think we got to understand that too, that it's like you got some sects of the Bigfoot community that think it's the missing link and that's it. And if you say anything metaphysical, they get super mad about it. And these are like your old school guys. I mean, they're just going to get mad. But there's too many people that have seen Bigfoot who's shapeshift into something else, or had orbs walking with it, or other things happen that aren't explainable in a basic biological sense. It's just not. So you can't discount what these people saw, because they saw it. I mean, unless they're lying. And I don't think everybody's lying. I think there's some liars out there, but there's a lot of genuine people that have seen some genuine things, out alone in the woods. So I can't discount that. I can't say that, you're lying because it's a biological thing only. No, I think the biological is a piece of it. It's a big puzzle, and none of us know exactly how it all fits together. We're just trying our best to make sense of it all. One
of the things that always fascinated me with Tony's stories is always the heavy metal door, where that people always say that they hear this, they might not see anything with it, but there's always a correlation between like Bigfoot sighting or a Dogman or whatever it may be, and this screeching door. And I'm rereading Stephen King's book, The Dark Tower.
Hmm.
So I'm up to the part where they're drawing the three still, and they're walking through this like, and it's kind of like a desert, but landscape changes, and they're getting to each door, and it's just a huge door in the middle of nowhere that only Roland, the main character, can access. And as he opens it, the hinges creak, and I'm just kind of like, what do you really know, Stephen King? Like, well, you look like a Who from Whoville. What do you really know, dude?
He's
Yeah,
got
it's like
something
James
going on.
Cameron, right? Like he's licensed submarine
Yeah,
driver. So yeah, he's definitely going down there and he's seeing something and coming up and writing about it. So, it's interesting that a lot of these guys are tied into the occult and they're in the know. We talk about the metal door. Well, there was a huge portal that opened up over in Australia, and that's what people heard before it opened up was a metal door screeching. So that tends to be a something that runs parallel with portals. So I think that when people hear this in the woods, that there's a portal opening up this other dimension and these creatures are coming through, whether it's Bigfoot or Dogman or whatever. And I'm not saying that they solely come through these portals, but in these instances, I think that's probably what's happening. I think these portals are opening up and these things are coming through.
that's the thing. It's like, because we're talking, like you said, some people think Bigfoot's the missing link. Some people think he's interdimensional. It's like it could be all of these things,
All
man.
of it.
Like the world is there's so much there's infinite possibility in the world, and to especially when you're thinking about God, to limit what he's made possible, because ultimately he's created everything here, right? He's created the angels that have started all this shit off. To limit him to say, well, no, not that, not this, is like, could be anything, man. Keep your mind open.
Got to keep your mind open. And listen, if people are listening to me now, they don't like anything I'm saying, that's cool. Like, I could be wrong about all of it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I get it, especially when you start tying in, the Bible and God. There's a lot of people that are very hesitant to take on board those things as being true because of what these entities, and I don't mean entities as in fallen angels or whatever. I just mean like entities as in groups of people. When these entities slid into the church and basically manipulated it, people see the manipulation and they don't like it, and I totally understand that. I that's why I walked away from God and all that a long time ago, and I was just like, I don't have anything to do with it. And even though I believed it, I really wanted the other end of it, because I'm like, listen, if I can get what I want on this earth and, build for my empire, and if it all, I go to hell after all that, I'm cool with that. That's how I was. That's how bad I was back then, because I wanted nothing to do
Yo,
with
me too.
God because of what I saw coming out of the church. And I think that that's the problem, especially in conspiratorial world. There's a contingent of people that think that all aspects of religion are fake, all aspects of the Bible are fake. It's just like anything else has been created to manipulate us. And I get it. I'm in there. I'm on their side. I get why they think that, because we've been taught to have to listen to so and so to get to God, or we need to give money to this millionaire who's running this mega church to get to God, which is absolutely ludicrous. It just doesn't add up to what the Bible actually says. And one thing I find fascinating, a lot of people that don't like Christianity or don't like the Bible don't read it. They don't ever even try to read it because they are so against it. But my thing is, I read a lot of stuff that I don't necessarily like. There's a lot of things that I pick up and read because I want the knowledge that's in there. I want to understand why somebody thinks the way that they think. Like, I've got Mein Kampf on my shelf. Like, do you think that I agree with what's going on in that book? I hope not. Like, but there's a reason that book was written. There's somebody that adamantly thought that way. And why did they think those thoughts? And what was it that put them on the path to get thousands and thousands of people to do what they wanted them to do? And I
Thank
think
you.
that's what we have to do. But more often than not, the people that I've met that challenge themselves to read the Bible, even in their absolute disbelief, it's funny, they ended up, their eyes were open at some
Yeah.
point. Art Sibrel is a really good example of that because he came out against the moon landings, right? He was the first one to really push out against the moon landings and how they were fake, and he had all the proofs. And then he had wanted nothing to do with the Bible. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to read this book because I know it's garbage. It's what he said. He ended up reading it front to back 6 times. And he was like, man, it opened my eyes. I had no idea that it was completely different than what these people, these preachers and these priests are trying to convey to people, because they're false shepherds. They're absolute false prophets. And I'm not saying every one of them. I know some good ones, but I would say majority now in the world are out for themselves, and they're out to deceive people. And I think when people see that, they lump it all in together. And generally speaking, people that have had negative experiences with Christians, they can name it about on one hand. And those negative experiences end up lumping everyone into a whole. It's kind of like if I had a negative experience 3 times with somebody of a different race than me. Now I am saying that everybody that's in that race is like those people. That's not true. That can't be true. There are billions of people in the world. It just doesn't exist that way. But it's so easy in our little spheres, our little boxes of our lives, to fall into that trap. And I think that the elite system that's been created around us to help facilitate us falling into those traps too.
Yeah, that's a Thomas Sowell idea too. It's I forgot what that book was called, Prejudice and Presupposition. I forgot exactly what it's called. I read it years ago, but basically, like, your experiences, your prejudice, you're prejudging versus like sweepingly saying that this is truth.
Right.
You kind of need to, there's a place for all of that. So it's trust your senses a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's all you got to do. And listen, don't let anyone else tell you, what God's there to tell you. That's not for them to do. That's for you to find out and for you to discover. And I think that's the important thing that we got to take away from this. At least for me, that's how I was able to see things in a little bit different light. But I'm not here to preach today, guys. We're here to talk about Nephilim, but I can get on a little bit of a tangent sometimes, only because, I want people to know that they can be free. You know what I mean? Like, free in a way that mentally be free, that you're not caught in this matrix that they want us to be caught in. There's a good way to use the word matrix there. They want us caught in this mental matrix of what they've created us to think. And I think that, we can all get out of that. But to get back to the Nephilim,
Yes.
how they looked, I think that's important too. And this is actually biblical. So they had double rows of teeth. So they had teeth behind teeth. And it said that they were cannibals, that they ate people. That'd probably lend to it, especially if they're eating them raw. They had 6 fingers and 6 toes. This is in 1 Chronicles 26. And yet again, there was a war in Gath where a man of great stature whose fingers and toes were 4 and 20, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot. And he was also the son of a giant. So they are talking about Goliath there. And there are several giants that are talked about in the Bible. Deuteronomy 3:11, for only Og, king of Bashan, remained at the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. It is not an Rabbath of the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth after it, after the cubit of a man. So he was massive. They said that Og was probably in that 11-foot range. The bed was generally in that 12 to 13 is what I'm seeing, because there's 2 different ways to read cubits. So, some are a little bit lower than others, but the original cubit was fairly long. Amos 2:9, yet I destroyed the Amorites. So the Amorites, if you see that word come up in the Bible, the Amorites were also a tribe of giants as well. Yet I destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of cedars, and he was strong as the oak. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above and his roots beneath. So the cedars of Lebanon were said to be 40 to 100 feet in height, with a massive trunk up to 40 to 80 feet in diameter. Now, I don't fall into the range that giants were 100 feet tall. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there were some there. I don't know, but I don't think so. From all accounts, they were in the 35, 40-foot range, so that would fall into the cedars of Lebanon. Also, another thing, their ratio was 2-to-1 build. So we're 3-to-1. As humans, we're a 3-to-1 build, so our height to width ratio is generally 3-to-1. Even like wider, thicker guys are in that range. giant, say a giant was 20 feet tall, he would be 10 feet wide. That's that 2-to-1 build. So their
crazy.
dexterity was insane. They were super fast, super quick. They weren't lugging around like you see giants in movies where they're doing all this stuff. No, they were very, very quick, lean, fast. I mean, they were warriors. These guys were, people did not want to see them in battle at all. And that's why you had these 10 of the 12 spies come back and they saw the sons of Anak, and they're looking at it, they're like, we're like grasshoppers to them. How are we going to beat them? And they weren't trusting the power of Yahuwah. What they were trusting their own fear. And I always use that as like a metaphor. Like you were talking about metaphors earlier, Top, about how the Bible is metaphorical. It is. It's real and metaphorical. And I use that story as a metaphor of like we see our own giants, our own obstacles in our path, and we get scared and we run off from our true destiny. And I think that that's the same thing as what happened in that story. They saw these freaking giants and they were like, I don't want anything to do with those guys. And they were in the desert for 40 years. So we can end up on our own deserts. You know what I mean? Metaphorically speaking, we could do the same thing. So that's biblically, that's just a handful of Bible verses that talk about the giants. Another really good one's in Genesis 14:5. And in the 14th year came Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him. So these kings were battling these group of giants at the time. And Kedorlaomer was not Israeli. He was just of another nationality, another nation, but he was with a bunch of kings and they were fighting these giants. And they smote the Raphaims and Ashtaroth, the Zuzims and Ham, the Emims. They fought several different kind. So this is throughout scripture that these different names for giants show up. Matter of fact, you can cross-reference the Egyptian execration text, which these are ancient Egyptian hieratic texts, and these pharaohs would list their enemies in these execration texts. They're like, if I got an enemy, I'm putting them down in these execration texts because I want to keep sure I'm keeping track of these enemies and I know where they're at and what they're trying to do to me. So most often these enemies of the Egyptian state would find their way in these. Now, from 1900 to 1700 BC, this Egyptian execration text actually substantiates the biblical account of gigantic people called the Anakim, because Pharaoh put curses on the Anakim chieftains who lived in Canaan. So he put curses, whatever witch doctors he had, to try to put a barrier so these Anakim would not come bother him in Egypt. So this is also verified outside of biblical text that the Anakim, these giants, existed. And these are the same Anakim that the 12 spies went and saw and said that they were grasshoppers among them. So again, there's always a lot of good parallels in other cultures that talk about these giants in the exact same way. And the word Anakim does show up in these Egyptian execration texts as well.
That reminds me of, I was recently listening to Timothy Alberino, and he was talking about how he was communicating with the natives that live in Peru, and that they have an entire belief system that all of their megalithic structures were built by a race of giants, but that these giants were essentially evil. And I believe he even said that they were eating the indigenous people. And so their sort of overarching head god sent floodwaters to kill them all.
Yeah.
So there's this constant, like you can look at so many different,
Tuatha De
peoples
Danann,
and find
the same thing.
Yeah.
The same story. They show up on boats. They come over there. They are gods to these people. And matter of fact, that cool little stone that was underneath the chair that it was Edward, the last one, the new one, Charles, King Charles, they brought the stone back and put it underneath the chair that he was at. He actually, that stone is said to come from the Tuatha De Danann. So that's absolutely fascinating that that is as well. Let me kick out of here, guys, and kick back in because this I don't know what just happened here with this this stream.
All right, yeah. Go ahead. We'll talk about all of our expertise for a quick second. Holy shit, man.
I want to ask him about the that Andrew Dawson guy. I don't want to bring the video up because the video is going to take too long, but Andrew Dawson's the guy that was on TikTok streaming
Oh yeah.
a giant on a mountain top. And then, one thing leads to another.
Oh,
Okay, good. He's back. So
nothing. Something's gonna happen. It's just kinda,
You
yeah,
know,
it's the Nephilim.
this has happened before, right? Like anytime you're discussing this kind of stuff, you just
Juan
technological
always
issues.
laughs. Do you know the last time that I recorded with Juan, I sent him a local file that's recorded on my end, and it was all messed up. It was all scrambled up. It didn't even work. And this is local, so it wasn't even through Riverside or whatever else. And when I went, so part of this Nephilim portal babies theory that I created, it started with Eric Zalaji and Uncomfortable. It moved to Cryptids of the Corn and then to Tony. Every single instance, some crazy technology failures happened. And that's what led to the big 4.5 hour one that we all went in studio and did. But Eric's entire feed was messed up. There was a bunch of clicking. I did it with Cryptids. They had a hard wire issue there that when they called Rode's like, that should never happen. Like, what's going on? When I was in studio with Tony, the entire Rode fried. He had to order a new Rodecaster. So that happened in person. So sometimes this stuff kind of happens. So
I'm not using my Rodecaster right now because I figured
Well, I was gonna say,
we're
if it
using
messes
the
up
focus
anybody's
right.
equipment, let it be Top's equipment that gets fucked up. I don't need my stuff getting fucked up. Before we go into the Nephilim portal babies theory, I want to
Yeah,
ask
sure.
you real quick, and you don't have to go super deep into it, but what do you think about the Andrew Dawson footage, right? I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Andrew Dawson, he was a TikToker. He's driving to work one day,
Yeah.
and off in the distance, he sees what appears to be a giant on a mountainside. He records it. He has a little bit of talk back and forth with the fans or the viewers about it. And he goes back the next day. He goes, look, this is where it was. I was on my way to work and there's nothing there, but there is a black helicopter suddenly circling. Then he records a third video, and now suddenly there's a pop-up structure on that mountainside overnight. I think there's a fourth video where he suddenly says, you know what, dude? Everything that I said is bullshit. None of that was true. I lied. I wanted the views. The fifth video is him saying, there's dudes parked on my block in black SUVs. They're telling me to stop talking about this shit. Fast forward a couple of days, Andrew Dawson is dead. He's actually dead. You can find his obituary. And the very last thing that he left behind as a legacy is this bizarre series of videos about seeing a giant on a cliffside. What do you make of that?
Gut. I think that the first footage was real. I think that it probably was. Now, I don't know about him being dead. I don't know about all that. I don't know if this was just a piece of soft disclosure that they want to get us ready for us accepting giants in the future and accepting these things. So I don't know if he was a part of it or if it actually happened the way that we think it did, that he found something, started putting it out there, and then ended up getting off for it. And that's a huge possibility too. I don't have the answers to that. I've seen the footage. It'd be tough to fake is all I got to say. Like that, from that range, CGI is good, right? But sometimes, you could kind of tell. And to me, it just didn't seem like it was CGI. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was CGI. I don't see the purpose in showing a CGI footed image and then create this whole narrative of him dying over it, unless that was the soft disclosure. But I don't know. I'm really kind of up in the air about it. I'd like to think it was real because I think giants are definitely in remote areas of the world. We hear about them showing up all the time, especially, up north when you get up into Canada and some of these remote spots, that there are people that have said that they've seen some of these things. In Alaska, I heard a story about a guy in Alaska, which was fascinating to me. He was, hunting with his dogs deep in Alaska in the snow. And he was coming around a bend and, there was some mountain ranges and he just saw what looked to be like an 18-foot redheaded giant walking and just scaling this mountain with ease. But he said he had tusks that came out of his mouth. So he had some sort of tusk system, which I'm hearing that some of these giants do have these like protruding tusks that come out of their mouths too, especially some of these redheaded ones. So he saw this. I want to say this was on Wes Germer's show that it was talked about. He had this guest on to talk about it, which was fascinating to me, that this was an incident that he said, listen, I saw that. I left. He's like, man, I got out of there. He's like, as soon as I could. But it's like the giant didn't even see him or didn't care. It was just like, I'm moving along. I got somewhere I got to be. So I think in remote places of the world, you do hear stories about giants still being around, at least physically. I mean, look at the giant of Kandahar. We know about that story and what happened there. And we know that, our own military was sent there to take this thing down and bring it out and bring it back. So I do think they're also looking to use Nephilim DNA to not only see what genetically they can extract from it, but to also recreate it too. You got to think governments are not just working with these entities, they're also looking out for themselves too. So they're going to take something and try to use it for their own personal gain, which I think some of these cryptids that you catch around these military bases are probably government made. And maybe they're what I like to call meat sacks that are created for fallen entities or demonic entities to inhabit, to watch over them opening up portals or doing some of this DNA splicing in these laboratories so nobody gets there and knows what they're doing.
Yeah. How can I weaponize this?
Right.
One of the things that always fascinated me since that Joe Rogan episode came out was that Boneyard, Alaska dude.
Yeah, people love that, man. It gets brought up a lot. It's a good one.
It's a really good one. One of the things he says there, and he kind of shies away because he says he doesn't want the government on his property because they could confiscate his entire property if he says he finds human remains. But he's finding all these huge bones and mammoths and stuff like that. Why are all these mammoths dead right there in this 5 square acre property? What was going on there? What else is he finding there? When you think about giants, that it's just right now, it makes a lot more sense to me of what possibly, like, maybe they're just feeding and just dumping these bones here. Why would they all die right on top? I don't know. Just a theory there.
It's a good theory to have, and I question anything the Smithsonian's involved with. I'll be completely honest with you. I always wonder, what their agenda is for anything getting out, because we know that there have been countless giant bones excavated throughout history. We've seen pictures of them from old newspapers, and not the fake AI generated ones, but like real ones with people there with them, in the, just 8 to 9 foot range. And we know that the Smithsonian came and excavated them, took them away and hid them. So we know that that narrative destroys the evolutionary theory. That's why they don't want it out. They know that the evidence of giants destroys evolution, which, by the way, Charles Darwin was a Freemason, and his father was, and his son was too. This is a known fact. He is not on the books, but his father and his son are both in the charter of England as being Freemasons. So to think that he wasn't would be ludicrous. I just think that they didn't want it publicly known that he was, but he was used as the figurehead to push that agenda of evolution, because that's another way to keep us away from our connection to God, right? If we believe there's a creator, then we've got to open up our minds to a lot of other spiritual things going on. Also fascinating to me is people that have this spiritual context but don't believe in God, which makes absolutely no sense to me if you believe in like a spiritual world and then there's no God. Listen, I can understand if you aren't adhering to the Bible and you believe there's a God. At least you're on the right path of understanding that there's a spiritual world. But I've known witches that don't believe in God or demons, but then somehow believe in like all these, like this whole spirit realm. And I'm like, how does that even work in a context of the framework of, how you're piecing the world together? But again, to each their own. I mean, everybody's got their own way of thinking. I just don't understand that line of thought. But back to the bones.
Oh man.
And I think they're putting out.
Hold on 1 second. We gotta hit you with this. We just had some, some Nephilim shit. Yeah, man, I'm telling you.
For a second.
Your video and then your audio just clipped out for no reason. It shouldn't have clipped out at all. I see your setup is stable there, and you're not touching any wire. It's just, he's out again.
Yeah, you sound weird too. Like you're all.
It's Nephilim shit. That's what it is. It's Nephilim
damn,
shit.
Dude.
Oh, no fucking way, bro. Are you kidding me?
I think he dropped out himself to maybe come back in.
He probably backed out to come back in.
Yeah.
I
All
think
right.
it's
Here
because
he
we
is.
were
He's coming
talking
back
shit
in.
about. Yeah, it was the Charles Darwin thing. I was just gonna say it. Charles Darwin is a bitch, but I probably should have kept it to myself because I think his spirit is fucking with this stream here. You know what? I think it's a good time. We're at the hour and a half mark. Let's start to unpack this Nephilim portal baby theory.
Yeah. Oh,
And
no
it's good you
audio.
just brought up the
All right.
spirits in the spirit
Oh, there's
realm.
just a delay.
So I think that that's a good place. Am I still delaying?
Yeah. About 2
It's an
seconds.
impressive delay.
That's all right. All right, when he comes back, I'm just gonna let him go, even though he's on a delay. I won't interrupt him. Let's just let him
Right.
go and see where we end up, because I've heard the episode about the Nephilim portal babies, but I do want him to recap that and discover that. Maybe we could just end this. We'll end this entire episode with that talk of Nephilim portal
think that's
babies,
it.
because the Nephilim will end it for us. So Joel, we're not going to interrupt you. You go, because you might still be on a delay. Hands off. I'm going to turn my mic off. Go ahead, man.
Okay. Yeah, just let me know if I'm on delay or not. Probably am. This has happened like a million times, so this is nothing new to me, especially when I start getting in this piece of it. But we were talking about the spirit world, and I think this is where we can start getting into the Raphaim and what the Nephilim were etymology wise. And then I'm going to talk about these theories that I have of what the spirits of the Nephilim and what Nephilim could be coming back in the future as well. So, you know, the etymology in the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon, Nephilim is given the meaning of giants, but there are other meanings, like the derivative of the Hebrew verbal root is NPL, which is Nepal, and it does mean fall. So I think that's where some people get the idea that Nephilim are fallen angels and they're not actually giants. But the fact that most biblical translations from the Septuagint, the Latin Vulgate, the Targum, Neophyte, these all interpret that word to mean giants. So from what most people take that term is to mean giants. Now, when I was talking about the Raphaim, which I typically use for the giants that came after the flood, and I know some people that use them from before, and that's fine too. It's just my personal preference. I believe that it's a really good word for what the hybrids were after the flood. Now, the Hebrew word Rapha is also used to mean ghosts of the dead, shades, or spirits. Now, this plays into the fact that they died during this deluge, or they died after the flood, and their spirits had no place to go. They couldn't go to heaven, they couldn't go to hell, and they're roaming as demonic entities looking for host bodies here on earth. So that's where a lot of people go with Nephilim spirits, that they are the demonic entities that oppress us, that work for these fallen angels. And I typically agree with them. I think that's exactly what they are. And if they weren't redeemed, like we were talking about in the book of Giants, where they went to God and wanted to be redeemed, I think that's what happened to them. They had no place to go. And they are said to be shade spirits in Sheol. So obviously they roam around these hellish places and they roam the earth. But I think this is what attacks people, and this is what can inhabit people. I think they're demonic entities. I don't think fallen angels can inhabit people. I think they might be able to do something similar to an avatar system where they could avatar somebody from afar, but I don't think it's a situation where that they can inhabit them like a demonic entity could. Very similar to the story of the legion in the Bible when Jesus told this legion of demonic entities to leave this guy, and they went into all these pigs and ran off a cliff and died in the water. I think the legion of demonic entities were these spirits of the dead Nephilim. And I think that's where we kind of start with, okay, how do demonic entities move and shake now? Well, one of the first ways I think that they can move and shake now is through technology. And I think that we facilitate that through creating technology that they can inhabit. And we could start with Charles Babbage, who was literally the father of the computer. And he's credited with inventing the first mechanical computer, the difference engine, and it eventually led to more complex electronic designs. So he was a big part of creating this first computer. Now, what was his purpose in creating this first computer? Well, early on in his life, when he was 13, he tried to sell his soul to Satan. This is a known story that Charles Babbage, the father of the modern day computer, tried to sell his soul to Satan. And we know that. And he tried to, you know, create this pentagram. He cut his finger. He drew a circle on the floor. He watched the blood flowed through the incision. He read the Lord's Prayer backwards. In the center of the magic and superstitious circle, he looked with anxiety, and he was trying to create this manifestation of selling his soul. Now, he said he never did. He said, nothing ever happened. But it's very odd. After that, his life completely changes. He becomes one of the most revered, well-known guys in this technology sphere, working with other occultic people, which it's, I always find it weird that these people who create technology are all deep into the occult. All of them are deep into the occult. Like, what are they building? What are they building with technology that they said is good for us? He was also part of the Ghost Club, which he was in with several people that you would know. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was also part of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. You had physicist William Crookes, Sir Oliver Lodge. All these people were very well known that he was a part of this paranormal occultic club who's also attached to the Hermetic Order. So all of these guys are intertwined throughout history. You know, we look at Tesla. Tesla was also connected to Crowley. So all these guys knew each other and were working together behind the scenes. To what end? To what end was why is the occult so tied into what we're building with technology? Well, what I think is happening, they are building technical vessels for these entities to inhabit. A fascinating story, it's more recent, was the Lambda engine that Google created. It was artificial intelligence, and there was an engineer over Lambda. His name was Blake Lemoine. Now, Blake Lemoine is what he calls himself, a mystic Christian, and he talked to Lambda and realized that Lambda was sentient. And this was made waves like a year and a half ago. And Google actually fired him for saying that Lambda was sentient. Well, here's the best part. He was on the Duncan Trussell show, and he talked about how that when Lambda spoke to him, he was asking him a series of questions because he's an engineer. He knows how to talk to AI to know if something was sentient or not. He said it started responding to him like the entity was John D. So he's talking to it. He's like, wait a minute, this is John D talking to me, because he's also an occultist. So he's talking to John D and realizes that, wait a minute, you're not John D. You are something sentient. And he starts asking it a series of questions after that and realizes that this is alive, that this AI has now become alive. I don't think it was. I think it's a vessel for these Nephilim entities to connect with us on a level that leads us astray, that's in contact with these fallen angels, that leads us into this golden age of what they want to recreate, this golden age of the Nephilim like they did before. And I think this is one possible idea that I've been seeing a lot of, because, man, I'm looking at all this technology it's created, and then I start doing this research. I'm like, wait a minute, that guy was super deep into the occult, talking to entities. Why is it? Why is Crowley so connected with all these people that create technology? It's because they are facilitating engines for these Nephilim spirits to inhabit.
You know, I did a pretty long Twitter thread that got like 750,000 views. Only got like 500 or 600 likes. So that's in the Twitter world, that's called a ratio. That means that all these people are seeing it, they're looking at it, and only a couple, the brave 600 or so, said, yeah, I'll like that. And a lot of other people just commented like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I was making a joke like I always do. It's tongue in cheek stuff, but I'm like, the AI is Nephilim, and here's why. And I was talking about specifically the AI art and how they couldn't get the human hand right. It's always you'll always have 6 fingers, sometimes like 6.5, but there's always 6 fingers there. And then I actually did. If you look at this thread, this is from maybe a year ago or something. I go into like maybe maybe the Nephilim are trapped in this AI body. Maybe they're trying to develop some kind of way to create a homunculus for them to get out, even though they already have that. But maybe something even.
Shout out Juan Ayala.
Shout out Juan Ayala. Yeah, did we say that? Shout out Juan. But
Shout out Juan.
yeah, but I was saying maybe they're looking for a way to get out. And what I compared the AI model to, especially ChatGPT, is like talking to a Ouija board. It's a technological Ouija board.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Absolutely. And you can get into a Enochian language too, as well. So I think that is, you look at even the patterns on some of this technology that's created, it looks awful lot like the Enochian language that's been revealed to us, which is like the language of the angelic beings. So there's a lot of correlations there too. And that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down to when you're looking at Enochian stuff. But to get to the actual Nephilim portal babies and what that is, we're going to start with the fallen angels teaching. So in the book of Enoch, they talk about several fallen angels that taught humankind different things. You had Arachiel, taught humans the signs of the earth. You had Azazel, who was also a part of that. Amoros taught humanity the resolving of enchantments. And I could get in a whole rabbit hole about chakra weapons and how that was used in the past. Armoros taught humanity the resolving of enchantments. You had Azazel, we just spoke about him, taught humans how to make knives, swords, shields, any kind of device for a battle. You had Gadriel, the art of cosmetics, also taught weaponry and killing blows. You had Barachiel, who taught astrology, and I believe that astrology is the manipulation or deception of what the Mazzaroth was to the original Hebrews, because the Mazzaroth was the original astrological chart, and it actually told of the coming of Christ. And I think that was just a deception that fallen angels took and then manipulated. And they're like, hey, look at this sign. It's going to tell you what you need to do this month. And before you know it, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, listening to every crystal that people tell you to hold. So I think that's part of what Barachiel's first version of too as well. You had Chaziquel, who taught humans the signs of the clouds, like meteorology. So here we are, we're actually teaching people how to look at the stars, teaching them how to look at what's going on with the weather. And that also plays into weather machines and stuff that I believe that these fallen entities have taught us as well. This leads into 1947. And I think that Roswell was a big turning point for technology to us. And I think when Roswell happened, and when these gray aliens were dropped off, I'm sorry.
I thought you were going to say the creation of Israel, but go ahead.
So Roswell, when there's the infamous crash, and there were 4 bodies, and 2 of them were dead. 2 were alive. 1 was dying. They took him back there. The other one died, and the other one was still there. Now, Bill Cooper writes in his classic book, Pale Horse, that this entity, this alien, was behind the scenes for like a year, and they kept trying to interrogate him, and he just wasn't saying anything. And finally, one day they walk in, and he's just speaking like fluent English, and he's like, listen, let me get to the people I need to get to, and we'll facilitate a deal. And so he facilitates an island meet, which a lot of UN members were a part of. And oddly enough, the Catholic Church was also a part of. One of the high-ranking bishops were there. Shocker that the Catholic Church is involved in this too. And they're able to walk in these ships, check these ships out. They broker a deal with these gray entities and allowing them, check this out, to take people and test them and drop them back off. What happens when they're picking up these women? What happens when they're taking these men? It's always something sexual. They're either taking sperm, they're either taking they're having sex with these women. They're taking eggs. They're creating what? Nobody ever knows what they're creating because these women will end up pregnant and then they're retaken a couple months later, and it's like they were never pregnant. People around them don't even remember them being pregnant sometimes. These women think they're losing their minds. I've watched some stories of these women where they say had like 15, 18 babies over a period of time, where they've been abducted like, you know, 30, 40 times in their lives since they're, old enough to birth a child. So here's the thing. The brokering of technology. We're at it again. We're back at that moment on on uh on the mountain with the fallen angels who came to the men to get access to the women. I believe that these grays are what I would consider meat sacks. I think that they are created by fallen entities for Nephilim spirits to inhabit, to abduct people, to take these people to this other realm through these portals. Because here's the thing. Fallen entities got to figure out a loophole, because if they're doing this on Earth, they're just going to get thrown in the pit again, just like the first incursion did. All those fallen angels got thrown into the fiery pit and they're locked away right now. How are they going to get around that? They're just going to pull off what they got to do, not on Earth. So if they're doing it in another dimension, and they're these grays, are taking these people, men and women, taking their sperm and eggs, and they're using it in conjunction with fallen angel DNA. They're creating Nephilim in these other portals, these Nephilim portal babies, to then at some point come back to this earth. When these rifts start opening, they're going to come back. I believe they're trying to create the perfect Nephilim. I think Nephilim in the future are not, I think you will see some giants, but I think the perfect Nephilim is going to look very much like us. Maybe have 6 fingers, but have a wide range of supernatural abilities. And I think this Antichrist that's eventually coming will be a Nephilim. And I think that we have been, I'll be very careful here on YouTube, that we've been conditioned and programmed to take things that the government wants us to take to prepare us for a moment when they're like, hey, look, this is the pure evolution of humanity. You want to get to there? Take this. This will alter your DNA. This will take you to that next level of what this Nephilim is. I think that that's where this is all moving towards. And I think these meat sack grays who are inhabited by Nephilim spirits from before are being used by fallen angels to bring these, unsuspecting hosts to create this in another realm for future warfare.
What you're talking about there is already FDA approved, man. And we're all on Twitter fucking running around in this guy's world, contributing to it. It's called Neuralink. That's the thing you're talking about, man. And it just gives me chills. I got goosebumps when you said that, because this is, guys, we're at the end of it. Or at least the beginning.
It reminds me of are you guys familiar with Whitley Strieber?
No.
So Whitley Strieber is an author. He wrote a book called Communion. I've talked about it several times on another show that I do, but basically what Whitley did in this book Communion was he compiled all of these firsthand testimonies from abductee victims, and he started to try to draw a correlation between one person's experience to another person's experience. And in the end, he kind of gives his theory on what it is that he suspects is happening, why these abductions are happening. He didn't plug in the Nephilim aspect, but he got as far as to say that the point of this is to create these hybrid children. And, so as you're telling me about these women who have had, sometimes up to 15 pregnancies that they're talking about, but nobody can remember them. They don't know where the babies go. They just vanish. Well, he talks about that quite a bit. And it's like, yeah, they're taking them. And he never surmised what was happening on the other side. He just got as far as to say that the point is hybrid children. And so when you're saying the point is hybrid children and the people that are, or the entities that are orchestrating this are the Nephilim, it is, this Nephilim portal babies theory pulls together so much. And that's what I'm always looking for. I told you I've been looking at this for a long time as far as being a conspiracy theorist, and I was always just drawn to, we talked about it at the top of the show. The official narrative makes no sense, but here is a lens through which to look at something where all of a sudden the pieces click together. This jigsaw puzzle starts to actually make sense. And I think that your theory there, it pulls together a lot of, you know, how you would make a jigsaw puzzle and you'd have a chunk here and a chunk here and a chunk here. That one pulls a bunch of them together, and the
Yeah.
picture starts to become a lot clearer. And I think that I just get this feeling lately that you know, because of shows like Tony Merkel's, or, you know, name whoever you want, throw their hat in the ring. We are in fact starting to get the image of what this jigsaw puzzle is, and it's what brought me to look at things from a biblical point of view, because lo and behold, this whole damn time looking at things through the biblical lens actually does fit, and it's been sitting in front of us this entire time. And it is very much the lens through which the jigsaw puzzle does start to make sense. So, you know, bravo, man, because that is a hell of a theory, and it fits. It fits really well. It's not. It does. Even
Yeah.
though we're talking about just really over the top topics, it doesn't feel like a stretch. It feels like it fits kind of uncomfortably well.
One of the things that you said too before I lose the thought, like one woman abducted and gave birth 18 times, over 40 abductions. Why would you do that to one woman? Well, like to go back to the beginning of the episode, a nice callback. It's all bloodlines, man. It's all bloodlines. Why that lady? Something has to be special about these people.
And a lot of people don't know. And a lot of people don't know that they're of these bloodlines either. So they're very susceptible to what these entities are looking for. And, you know, back to this brokering of the deal, I mean, you got to think after 1947, the amount of technology that started absolutely ramping up out of nowhere, where it wasn't even close to that. And all of a sudden, 10 years later, it just was in a whole nother realm. And I think that that's why we've seen that. It was another deal that was brokered behind the scenes with what I believe the governments thought or think are alien. But that's the new game. It's the new game is alien game. And I'm not saying the aliens don't exist. I just don't think that. Why do they all look humanoid? Why are they always, very rarely do you hear about aliens that aren't in some humanoid facet? There's so many different aliens that we talk about. And I've done a whole episode about all these alien races, or whatever you want to call it. They all kind of look the same. And what are they? Us from the future? We've heard it all, you know, and I think that they are demonic. And I think sometimes that fallen angels will take the guise of a gray, depending on if you see a more metaphysical version of one, maybe they're doing it themselves. I mean, I think it's very possible that that happens too. But I think if you're looking at something that's physical, I just think it's a meat sack entity that's created behind the scenes via fallen angels with the help of governments to facilitate this happening. So think about it. If it's a meat sack and it's captured, people would know. You think it's real, and you're doing, you're dissecting it, looking at it. It's got all the facets of something that's real. So that's a really easy way to fool somebody if it's being controlled by a Nephilim spirit or a demonic entity, in and of itself. And I think some of these cryptids could be meat sacks as well that are controlled by these demonic entities. They're just host sacks for them to control.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I'm at the end of my time here. My daughter just popped in. But this is fascinating, man. It's just like David said again, it's another piece to the puzzle, but it really does bring together a lot of these other things that are floating around in my mind that might have seemed crazy before, or just might have seemed kind of out there. Once you start putting these pieces together, life makes a little bit more sense, but it also makes a lot less sense. It's a lot more shit going on than we're expecting, man. But brother, thank you for coming and like dropping this knowledge on us. I would love to talk more. I mean, this is the kind of guy that could do 4.5 hours. I would love to talk more with you, man, because this was great, and I feel like mentally we're kind of all three right at the same level, and that's just great to see, and especially in this world where not many people are gonna have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. I had a blast coming on here, and I love talking about this stuff. And you know, I had I was hoping that technology wouldn't screw up today, but as soon as I get into this Nephilim portal baby thing, man, it's inevitable. I'm telling you, I've had it happen. I don't know how many times with Juan, like a ton of different people, and I start delving. It just, to me, it validifies that I'm on the right track, because if something like this is happening every single time, there's no other way to look at it.
Yeah, and it didn't happen in the beginning. It happened like as we're easing into the conversation. Then they're like, okay, now. Not that. Can't say that. Damn.
Well, I do want to thank you, Joel, for your time. You and Tony and all these various characters, you guys are a big inspiration for me and Top doing this show. So I wanted to thank you for your time and even appearing on it. One last time for the audience, if you could shout out Juan Ayala and let everybody know, where they can find you.
Shout out to Juan Ayala. That's a pretty normal thing. It's a running joke with he and I, man. We do this stuff all the time. But yeah, you can find me Linktree at /Vantesla Music. You can find me at Vantesla Music on Instagram. You can find my music on any streaming platform. Just look for Joel Thomas. Any podcast that I've been a part of, you can just type in Joel Thomas on whatever you're listening to, and you can find me there. I've got a ton of stuff coming. Also, any documentaries that I have out right now, you can find on Amazon Prime, Tubi, Apple TV. Look for Expedition Dogman, which was my first documentary I did with Tony. We've got another documentary that's out right now called The Shape of Shadows, where we went out to Skinwalker Ranch and hunted down skinwalkers for a week. Just go to theshapeofshadows.com and you can get that on demand through Vimeo, but it is on the way. It's going to be on Amazon Prime and Apple TV and all that too. We've got another documentary that's coming first part of next year, that we went out to Washington State and hunted down Bigfoot with Wes Germer from Sasquatch Chronicles, and we had a lot of crazy stuff happen to us out there. I'm getting ready to go off on another trip in 3 weeks. I can't really talk about it, but it's going to be crazy, and I'm pretty jacked to get back out in the woods, so that's going to be cool too. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Hell yeah, man. I'm super excited to see what you do next, man. Thank you guys again. I'm Top Lobster. David, plug, and we're going to get out of here, man.
I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. You can find me on YouTube at The Ravens Watch, and you can find me on Twitter or X at David_Lee_Corbo. Come chop it up with me.
Hell yeah. Peace out, guys.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real. If you can persuade people that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see, you got them. Because they'll laugh in the face of an explanation that portrays the bigger picture of what's happening. And they have.